She showed up at the gate of the Hargrove ranch with a cracked leather bag, a boy of 9, and a name nobody in Dust Creek, Texas had ever heard before. Nobody asked too many questions back then. It was 1874, and the frontier had a way of swallowing stories whole. But here's the thing. When Thomas Hargrove finally discovered who she really was, what she had done, where she had come from, and what she was hiding behind those quiet gray eyes and that flour-dusted apron, he didn't send her away. He sat down in the dirt, right there in the yard, and he didn't get up for a long time. And after that day, he never once let her leave. This is the story of Clara Voss, a woman the West tried to forget, and a man who decided she was worth remembering. Stay with us, because the secret she was carrying, you won't see it coming. Dust Creek, Texas, a town that was barely a town. 2 saloons, a general store, a church with a bell that stuck in the rain, and about 340 souls who had learned a long time ago that the land didn't care about your feelings. Thomas Hargrove ran the biggest cattle operation in the county. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet in the way that men who have buried someone they loved tend to go quiet. His wife, Eleanor, had died of fever 3 years prior. He had 2 ranch hands, 1,600 acres, and a cook who had just quit without warning to marry a preacher in San Antonio. So when a woman appeared at his gate one Tuesday morning in late October, carrying nothing but a bag and a child, he didn't turn her away. She said her name was Clara Voss. She said she was a widow. She said she could cook, clean, mend, and keep quiet. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the boy, who stared back at him with enormous dark eyes and didn't flinch. "The boy work?" Thomas asked. "He will," she said. He hired her on the spot. $3 a week, room and board, no questions. The no questions part is important, because Clara Voss had a lot of answers she wasn't giving. The first thing people noticed about Clara was her hands. Ranch women in Texas in 1874 had hard hands. Rough, cracked, calloused from work that never stopped. Clara's hands were calloused too, but differently. The kind of callus that doesn't come from scrubbing floors. It comes from something else entirely. Something that required grip, precision, repetition. The second thing people noticed was that she never talked about her husband. Widows, as a rule, talked about their husbands. They wore their grief like a shawl, visible, familiar, communal. Clara wore hers like a locked door. When anyone asked, the ranch hands, the women at the church social, the nosy postmaster's wife, Clara would simply nod and say, "He passed on the trail." And then she would change the subject so smoothly that most people didn't even realize she'd done it. Thomas Hargrove noticed. But Thomas Hargrove had hired her to cook biscuits and stew, not to confess her history. And Lord above, she could cook. The kind of cooking that made a man close his eyes when he took a bite. Deep, slow flavors. Stews that had clearly been built from something. Knowledge, practice, a kind of patience that doesn't come from cookbooks. The ranch hands started showing up 5 minutes early to supper. That had never happened before in the history of the Hargrove operation. The boy's name was Eli. Eli Voss was 9 years old, small for his age, and possessed of the kind of silence that made adults slightly uncomfortable. He didn't play. He watched. He helped wherever he was needed without being asked. He could fix a harness buckle faster than a grown man, and he could read, which was rare enough out there that Thomas's older ranch hand, Cobb, once watched Eli read a supply list aloud and then shook his head like he'd witnessed a small miracle. Eli called his mother Ma and Thomas Mr. Hargrove and said very little else to anyone. But sometimes, late in the evening, Thomas would find Eli sitting on the porch rail watching the sky go dark over the mesquite flats. and something about the way the boy sat, straight-backed, still, like he was waiting for something, made Thomas feel a particular kind of loneliness he couldn't name. He started leaving a second chair out on the porch. After a week, Eli started using it. They'd sit out there together, the man and the boy, not saying much, just watching the stars come out over Texas. It was the quietest friendship Thomas had ever been part of, and somehow, the most honest. Now here's where you need to pay attention, because the story shifts here. It was a Thursday, 6 weeks after Clara arrived, that the first letter came. Thomas was in town at the general store when the postmaster, Jeremiah Fitch, a man constitutionally incapable of minding his own business, handed over the envelope with a look that said more than any letter could. "That there's addressed to the Hargrove Ranch," Fitch said slowly. "But the name on it ain't yours." Thomas looked at the envelope. It read, C. Weston, Hargrove Ranch, Dust Creek, Texas. Not Voss, Weston. Thomas tucked it in his coat pocket, bought his flour and nails, tipped his hat to Fitch, and rode home without saying a word. That evening, after supper was cleared and Eli was in his bunk, Thomas set the letter on the kitchen table in front of Clara. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at him. Something moved behind those gray eyes. Not fear, exactly. More like the moment before a decision gets made. "You want to open it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to tell me who C. Weston is," he said. She stood. She walked to the window. She looked out at the darkness for so long that Thomas began to think she simply wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Me. My name before I took Eli's father's name. Before everything." "Who's it from?" She turned. "My brother. He's been looking for me." "Why?" And here's where Clara Voss, Clara Weston, sat back down at the table, folded her hands in her lap, and told Thomas Hargrove a story he was not prepared for.
I believe you.
Now before we get to what she told him, and believe me, you need to hear every word of this. If you're the kind of person who loves a story that pulls the ground out from under you, you're going to want to subscribe to this channel. We tell these stories the way they deserve to be told. Hit that button and you'll never miss one. We'll be right here waiting. Clara Weston had been born in Kansas City in 1848. Her father, Robert Weston, was a man of considerable reputation. A surveyor, a land broker, a man who knew exactly where the railroads were going before the railroads knew. The Westons were not rich in the way that people with carriages and servants are rich, but they were comfortable, educated, precise. Clara had been educated accordingly. She read Latin. She could calculate surveying angles in her head. She played piano with the kind of technical mastery that left audiences more impressed than moved. She was also, by every account, fiercely stubborn and profoundly uninterested in becoming anyone's decoration. At 20 years old, she married a man named James Voss, a cattle broker, not a surveyor, which disappointed her father considerably. James Voss was handsome and adventurous, and not particularly attentive. They moved west. They had Eli. And then, when Eli was 3 years old, James Voss rode out one morning to settle a debt and didn't come back. They found his horse 3 days later. No James, no explanation, no body. What followed was 2 years of the worst kind of uncertainty. Not grief. Grief has a shape to it. This was fog. A woman waiting in fog with a small child and a dwindling bank account, and a brother who kept writing letters asking her to come home and be sensible. She didn't go home. Instead, and this is the part that Thomas Hargrove was not prepared for, instead, Clara Weston Voss had done something that women in 1872 simply did not do. She had gone to work for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. You heard that right. Sit with that for a second. The woman making Thomas Hargrove's biscuits and keeping his accounts and singing Eli to sleep every night was a trained Pinkerton operative. Not a secretary, not a clerk, an operative. The Pinkertons had employed women since the agency's founding. Alan Pinkerton himself believed female agents had advantages in observation and infiltration that male agents simply could not replicate. Kate Warren, the first female Pinkerton, had once personally saved President Lincoln's life. Clara knew this history. She had walked into the Kansas City field office with a letter of introduction from a family friend, and a calm that apparently unsettled the interviewing agent enough that he hired her before he'd fully decided to. She had worked 4 cases in 2 years. Confidence schemes, a missing railroad payroll, a situation involving a judge and several people who had decided the judge was in the way of their ambitions. She had been good at it, the kind of good that comes from paying attention to everything while appearing to notice nothing, from being the woman in the corner that nobody looks at twice. And then the last case had gone wrong. She told Thomas about it in pieces, the way you tell a thing that still has edges sharp enough to cut. Her assignment had been to go west to a town called Red Rock, New Mexico. A man named Calloway, Gerald Calloway, land speculator, associate of corrupt territorial officials, the kind of man who built fortunes on the misery of settlers he'd swindled, had been the target of a Pinkerton investigation for 18 months. The agency needed someone inside his household, someone he wouldn't suspect. Clara was given a cover identity, a widow looking for domestic work. She had Eli with her. The agency had initially objected, but Clara had argued, correctly, that a woman with a child was less suspicious than a woman without one. She moved into Calloway's household as his housekeeper. She cooked for him. She cleaned for him. She listened to everything. She gathered enough evidence in 8 weeks to end Gerald Calloway's operation entirely. But here's the part that kept her awake at night. Here's the part that made her take Eli and run and change their path and end up at a gate in Dust Creek, Texas, with a cracked leather bag and a made-up name. Before the case was resolved, before the agency could move, Gerald Calloway had found out. Not about her specifically, about the investigation. Someone inside the agency had talked, and Calloway was the kind of man who, when he suspected a leak, plugged every possible hole simultaneously. He had disappeared. The evidence she'd gathered had been lost when the agency's local contact was ambushed on a road outside Red Rock, and Calloway, who had powerful friends and considerable resources, had sent word that whoever had been watching him inside his household would pay a price for it. Clara didn't wait to find out what that price looked like. She took Eli, and she moved, and she kept moving. Not panicking. Clara Weston didn't panic, but careful, deliberate. Each town a calculation, each name a small construction. Until Dust Creek, until a man at a gate who asked if the boy could work and hired her without questions. Thomas Hargrove sat with this for a long time. The kitchen had gone fully dark while she talked, neither of them thinking to light the lamp. Now the only light was the thin silver coming through the window from a half moon over the Mesquite Flats. "The letter from your brother," he finally said. "He doesn't know about the Pinkerton work. He just knows I ran. He's been trying to find me for a year." She paused. "He's not the danger. Calloway. He has people looking. I don't know how close they are. I don't know if they're looking at all anymore." But she stopped. "I thought you should know. If something comes to your gate that isn't what it looks like, you should know." Thomas leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "Why didn't you just leave when you had the letter?" he asked. "You knew what it meant. Why tell me?" Clara looked at him directly. "Because you left a chair on the porch for my son." What do you think Thomas did next? Drop your answer in the comments, because his choice is the whole center of this story. and we want to know if you saw it coming." What Thomas Hargrove did was this. He went to bed. He got up the next morning at 4:30, the same as every morning. He did not ask Clara to leave. He did not ask her to stay. He saddled his horse, rode out to check the north fence line, and came back at noon for the meal she had made. Venison, cornbread, a pot of black coffee. And he ate it the same way he always ate it. Then he said, "That back room off the barn has a bolt on the inside. Eli can move his bunk there if you want him closer to you at night." Clara looked at him. "And I've got a Winchester that needs a second shooter," he added. "Assuming you can shoot," she said. "I qualified at the Pinkerton range at 60 yards. He pushed back from the table. "Good. I'll put it above your door." That was it. That was the whole conversation. And somehow, in that rangy, economical exchange, the kind of conversation that only happens between two people who are both more scared than they're letting on, and both too proud to say so, something shifted between Thomas Hargrove and Clara Voss. Call it trust. Call it alliance. Call it two people who had each been carrying too much alone, deciding, without quite saying so, to put some of the weight down together. The weeks that followed had a different texture to them. Thomas started finding reasons to be near the house, small adjustments to the daily routine. Riding back at noon instead of eating in the saddle, staying on the porch past sundown, checking the south perimeter that just happened to bring him close to the kitchen window at dusk. Clara started leaving coffee on the stove at midnight. She told herself it was for anyone who might need it. But it was always Thomas who came in at midnight. Eli, who noticed everything, said nothing. But he started calling Thomas Sir instead of Mr. Hargrove, which on the frontier in 1874 was a meaningful distinction. They read Eli's books together by lamplight. Thomas discovered that Clara knew more about land survey than he did, which mortified and delighted him in equal measure. Clara discovered that Thomas had been writing letters to his dead wife in a journal for 3 years, which he told her accidentally during a conversation about grief, and immediately regretted. She didn't pity him. That was what he noticed. She just nodded and said, "I talked to James for a year after he disappeared, out loud, when Eli was asleep. I figured if he was dead, he'd want to hear it. And if he wasn't dead, well, he deserved to know what he'd walked away from." Thomas said nothing, but he wrote something in his journal that night that he hadn't written in 3 years. The danger, when it arrived, did not look like danger at all. It looked like a man in a gray suit riding a very clean horse into Dust Creek on a Wednesday morning in December. He introduced himself at the general store as a land assessor from Austin, asked politely about acreage in the area, and had supper at the saloon. He was pleasant, unremarkable, forgettable, which was, of course, the point. Clara saw him from 20 yards away when she came into town for sugar. She knew him. His name was Doyle. He'd been at the Pinkerton office in Kansas City before someone bought his loyalty, and he'd been doing Calloway's quiet work ever since. He was not violent himself. He was a finder. He found people, and then other people did the violence. Clara bought her sugar. She spoke to no one. She walked back to her wagon, climbed up, and drove home at a pace that would not attract attention. Inside, her mind was running through calculations the way it had been trained to run. What Doyle knew, what he would do next, how much time she had. Whether Eli... She did not finish that thought. She shut it down. Fear was information. You used it. You didn't feed it. Thomas was at the fence when she got back. She walked out to him directly. "He's here," she said. Thomas looked at her face. He didn't ask who. He just said, "How long?" "He'll confirm it's me by tonight. He'll send word to Calloway's man in the area. We have until tomorrow morning, maybe tomorrow night if the courier is slow." Thomas put down his fence tool. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the flat, dry distance. and Clara watched him make a decision. Not dramatically, not with any visible struggle, just quietly, the way Thomas Hargrove did everything. "Then we'd better be ready by tonight," he said. What happened next is the part of this story that Dust Creek talked about for 20 years afterward. Not the confrontation, though there was one, the following dawn, when two men rode up the Hargrove Ranch Road and found a situation considerably less simple than they'd expected. A rancher, a former Pinkerton operative, one Winchester, one side-by-side shotgun belonging to Cobb, and a 9-year-old boy who had very quietly saddled the fast horse and tied it at the back of the barn without being asked. Nobody was killed. Nobody needed to be. The two men were persuaded, through the combined effect of superior positioning, a woman who did not miss at 60 yards, and the sudden appearance of 6 neighboring ranchers who Thomas had apparently ridden out to call at 3 in the morning, that Dust Creek was not a profitable destination for their employer's business. Calloway himself was brought down 4 months later. A different investigation, a different set of agents, a package of evidence that Clara had kept, carefully, quietly, in a saddlebag she'd never once unpacked since Red Rock. She sent it to the Kansas City office through her brother. The trial took 6 months. It was covered in newspapers as far east as St. Louis. But none of that is what Dust Creek talked about for 20 years. What Dust Creek talked about was the morning after the confrontation at the Hargrove Ranch, when Thomas Hargrove walked into the kitchen, where Clara was making coffee, with the methodical calm of someone who had decided that ordinary life was going to continue, whether the world cooperated or not. He stood in the doorway. He said, "I'd like you to stay." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I'm making coffee. I am staying. Permanently," he said. "If you want." A silence, the kind of silence that has weight. "You know what I am," she said. Not a challenge, a fact, offered clearly. "I know exactly what you are," he said. "That's why I'm asking." They married in the spring. The preacher whose bell stuck in the rain performed the ceremony. Cobb stood as witness and cried, which he denied for the rest of his natural life. Eli wore a new shirt that Clara had made from cloth Thomas had bought in secret 3 weeks earlier, which Clara had pretended not to notice. Eli took Thomas's name. He asked to. That part wasn't arranged. Thomas Hargrove, who had gone quiet when he lost the person he loved, found out that quiet didn't have to mean alone. That a woman who watches everything and says only what she means is not a locked door. She's a person who has learned the difference between what's worth saying and what isn't. And Clara Voss, Clara Weston, Clara Hargrove, who had spent 2 years running, found out that the only thing harder than surviving on your own is letting someone help, and that sometimes the kindest thing a person can do for a widow they've just met is ask if the boy works and leave a second chair on the porch. There's a line in Thomas's journal, the one he'd been writing in since Eleanor died, the one he kept writing in until the year he turned 68, that one of his grandchildren found decades later and read aloud at the funeral. It read, "She showed up with nothing, and I thought she needed saving. Turned out she was just deciding whether I was worth it." The frontier did swallow stories. It swallowed hard ones, unfair ones, ones that deserved more than they got. But some stories, the ones that happen in kitchens and on porches and in fence lines at noon, between two people who've both been through something and chosen, very carefully, to still be open to something good. Those stories have a way of lasting. This one did. If this story stayed with you, and we hope it did, take 1 second and subscribe to this channel. We build these stories the way they deserve to be told. Slow, real, with every detail earning its place. Hit the bell so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments, did you see Clara's secret coming? What moment hit you hardest? We read every single one. This video is an artistic reconstruction created using artificial intelligence tools developed independently and exclusively for the purpose of entertainment and storytelling. The characters, events, settings, and situations depicted are fictional and are the product of creative authorship. They are not intended to represent real historical persons or factual events. Viewers are encouraged to consult verified historical sources for accurate information about life in the American West during the 19th century.